Welcome everyone to the first digital edition of our conversation series, Let's Talk News Business. We did this before. We did it at the school, at CUNY, the Newmark J-School in New York City. So now we are doing it in the digital space. Thank you for joining us for this conversation here. I'm super excited that our first guest today is Julia Beizer. Julia has been one of my role models in digital media for quite a while. She is the Chief Product Officer at Bloomberg Media and is doing an incredible job there. And before that, she already had senior leadership roles at the Huffington Post, Washington Post, and in general is one of the very forward-thinking product people and strategic product leaders in that space. Julia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Anita. Good to see you.
Fantastic. So how this is going to go is we're gonna have a little bit of a conversation for 20-ish minutes. We want this to be as interactive as possible in a large group Zoom call. So we'd definitely encourage all of you to send in any questions that you might have in the chat during our conversation, after our conversation. We're gonna use the first 20 or so minutes to chat and then we're gonna have time to answer questions and discuss a little bit. So use the chat for your questions at any time. So Julia, the topic that we decided on today is the ROI of product. And when we came up with that topic, you and I have already been talking a bit about the question how to connect the worlds of product and business, how to persuade your organization that product is an essential part, not just because user centricity is important, but also to make a business case for your media organization. So that's something that we want to talk about today. And let me maybe kick this off with the first question. How do you at Bloomberg make that connection? How do you work on making product an essential part of the business at Bloomberg?
Well, great question. And first of all, I just love this topic. I think, oh, my face is really big. This is going to be distracting. Okay. I love this topic. I think that it's pretty easy to make a business case for product. If you think about product as not an internal communications mechanism, but rather the link between the business you want to be in and the technology you want to build. And I see product managers playing a role as sort of a pivotal glue between various different parts of the business: editorial, design, engineering, business side concerns. All of these differing functions go someplace to be mediated. And I think product can play that role. And so I think a business case for product is really about how does product play its role for the business to show how its work delivers value. And I think that as all of us watch what's happening in subscriptions in the industry, it's very easy to make that case, right? Because subscriptions is such an easy customer-focused business in a way, right? Do something great for consumers, prove your value every day, and then you'll retain your users. And I think product has a great role to play, not only in acquisition, but also helping with retention and delivering product features and innovation that will help keep users around.
That's a great point. Do you feel that that shift to subscription that's happening or has been happening over the last years, broadly speaking, in the industry, do you feel that's something that has kind of brought product more to the forefront of the conversation?
I'm going to back up a little bit and frame it with my own path, which you and I have talked about a number of times. But like, I started on the journalism side, and I wrote about local entertainment, and I was just young enough when I hit the business that I realized there was this role to play, that I would hear my bosses talking to engineers And I would say, oh, no. What she's saying is this. What he's saying is this. Can we do this? And as it turns out, there's a whole job for that. So I think if you take a long view of how the industry has reacted to product, initially, news companies, this is a massive generalization, but this is my experience. News companies were like, hey, yeah, digital revolution, we should hire some engineers. And then, after a while they were like, wait, we should hire someone else to work with the engineers. Enter product. And I don't think that's a great setup, right? Because that essentially relegates the role of product or project management really to an internal communications function. And product can be so much more than that. It can do more for your business. So I think subscriptions helped accelerate it, but essentially what you're seeing in the market is an industry figuring out this new role. Is it going to play a big part in our business? Does it matter to us? The industry, each company is going to be different. The industry is going to, each company is going to make different decisions along those lines. The reason why I think it's so essential is because as we build these businesses, you have to keep the customer at the core. And that's what product management is all about. One of the things that I like to say is that our industry was built by salespeople. Editors are selling big visions of grand things that they're going to cover. Publishers are selling kind of grand visions of things advertisers should want to align themselves with. Enter the digital era, and selling big things is not how you win. You win by a game of inches, by going out on the field every day and continuing to deliver for your customers. That's really where product excels. Yeah. Now look, culturally, we don't sound like salespeople. And so, wow, the business is adapting. Wait, do I trust this person? This person always has a caveat, and so I think it's about businesses starting to get comfortable with really digital, which is a game of trying something, seeing if it works, doing more.
That's such a, I already have like seven questions building up on that. We won't have time for all of them, but, but one thing,
great.
These were some amazing, amazing points. And one question that immediately comes to mind is, you said that businesses are, or broadly speaking, businesses are starting to see the potential big value of powerful product teams. Is there a certain danger that now with the crisis hitting, that there is a certain backlash of organizations saying, oh, well, we just can't afford this thing anymore, this innovation product thing. We have to focus on survival, and we're just going to kind of dial it back to the more legacy parts of the organization? Because I could imagine that this could be part of the development that's going on.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I see two outcomes. Of course, in times of contraction, you say, oh, should we just dial back to revenue generating functions? And that makes a lot of economic sense. I guess I would argue product is a revenue generating function. A guy on my team who leads subscription product for us, like he's done nothing but deliver value for this company. And through something that I think was a real eye-opening moment for lots of people on the team, through rigorous A/B testing and evaluating. So in the subscription landscape, he's proven his value every day. So yeah, it says product on his business card, if you will, but his is a revenue generating function. I also think if you take there's an interesting trend happening in our industry in particular. Product thinking, you don't go to school for this, anyone can do it. Right? Certainly I'm one of these people who do it. You don't have a specialized degree. And I think product thinking, that has already tipped over. Entire organizations are embracing product thinking, no matter where you sit. One of my key partners at Bloomberg today runs consumer marketing for us in the subscription business. And she's a marketer. Like, that's her training. But a lot of the language she uses, to my mind, is the language of product. What I think you see in today's digital landscape is that everyone embraces that, like, you got to lean into customer trends and customer behavior. And so I think, and a lot of young journalists I talk to are so enthusiastic about the role as product, but they definitely consider themselves journalists and want to embrace product thinking in the newsroom. So I think to use the parlance of our time, the infection is already kind of spread. So product is a bit of a super spreader in the news business. It's whether we choose to listen to it as leaders of media companies. And, I think if you don't, that's your peril. You've got to figure out how to lean into this. This is where your customers are.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the one of the follow-up questions that I'd have is how do you structure product in your organization? Who does the head of product report to? Do you need a chief product officer? Do you need a direct line to the CEO? Does it have to be on par with the editor-in-chief? How do you manifest that power? Because that is, I think, a lot of the people that I talk to in organizations that might not be as product mature as Bloomberg Media. I think what they often struggle with is the lack of real power and the lack of, a seat at the table to a certain extent.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer. Many of you know Shailesh Prakash. He's my former boss at the Washington Post. And after I'd left the Post, I texted him. I had some question about, this is going somewhere, I promise, about how to structure chargebacks in major corporate organizations and how to handle, essentially an accounting issue. And I said, look, have you ever seen a model that works? Because I know the one I'm in doesn't work, and what's the right? And he said, I have lots of thoughts about this. I'll get back to you. And he texted me back later that night with a bunch of thoughts about, well, you can do it this way. I've seen this model, and here are the pros and cons. I've seen this model, and here are the pros and cons. And then he said, ultimately, it's about aligning the right incentives to get people pointing towards a goal. And ultimately, I think that's the role of product. And at the time, I gave him a hard time because as the product manager working for him, an engineer by training, everything that seemed undesirable was always the role of product. And so I gave him a bit of a hard time about that. But it's been something that I think about at least once a week. Ultimately, I think that is the role of product. How do you figure out how to divine from an organization full of miscommunication, and yes, sometimes ego, and conflicting values that aren't always aligned? How do you divine what are the right goals of this organization and what's the path to put them on to get there? I do think that's the role of product.
Tell me a little bit about,
Well, it's been alarming to me.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's been alarming to me since I moved to New York. I think I had this perception when I was like this kind of former journalist cast out of the newsroom doing product at the Washington Post. I moved to New York, this like massive tech capital, and still like product was in many ways a project management function, at least that I saw in organizations. I think you, in order to do that well, you apply some of the principles of both reporting and user empathy. Listen. Figure out what people's goals are. Try to figure out and then reflect that back to the organization. And that to me is the most pivotal role product can play. To say essentially, here's all the things we want to do. If I gave you $100, you could spend $1 on each of them and we wouldn't get very far. But what if we made 3 $30 bets and had $10 left over for a rainy day? What would that look like? And the organization faced with that resource choice starts to have the real conversations that I think you miss. So I think product managers, through a reporting function of figuring out what everyone's trying to do, and then a reflecting function, telling the organization, here's what I heard. Are we aligned on this? You can actually drive some really interesting prioritization questions. Organizations don't like that. They would rather you just said yes and went on your way, But ultimately, with the resources we have and the opportunities and challenges in front of us, we have to make smart choices. And so I think whether it's that formal or informal, that is a real pivotal role that product can play in the world today.
No, that's the topic of focus and prioritization and the role product can play in it. I think that's a fantastic example of value creation. How do you, let's put it that way. If you're in an organization where part of the managerial team or part of the editorial leadership team might not be convinced that they should very unlikely case. They might not be convinced that they should share power with someone else, this new person coming up, the chief product officer. Not a highly unrealistic scenario that someone who has old power might not be too intrigued to give away some of that power, and with the power, some of that budget, with that budget, some of the teams. How do you navigate, and how did you navigate in your roles, this tension between the old power centers and the new power centers in an organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's different everywhere. I guess my approach has always tried to be an honest broker, that other people may be playing games around you, but how do you just sort of lay out the choices and priorities as you see fit? It's worth noting that approach has backfired on me a number of times. My instinct is always to be more upfront with an organization about essentially what you can and cannot afford to do, and organizations would much rather not talk about what you can't do. You're negative, you're not a free thinker, you're all these things. Look, I think that I try to be an honest broker. I think I've also tried to show how it benefits, let's say, newsrooms, how product thinking benefits newsrooms. I have devoted more engineering time than probably worth it on a piece of paper to storytelling, to CMS work, to those kinds of functions that, like, the ROI on those investments aren't clear. But I see them as investments in the craft. I'm under no illusions here. The product that we sell as part of our subscription business is the journalism. It isn't some cool, whatever button response I've put on this pay function on the subscribe button. It is the journalism. So ways we can make journalism better through the application of engineering and technology. I've devoted a lot of time on that without a clear ROI. And I think when people see, hey, like, she gets it, she's on my side, it's helpful on some of those bigger bets. I also think, like, when you invest in something like your article template that's the 80% of your stories are in every day, you start to say, hey, look, I care about the presentation of this journalism and I'm going to make it better. So I think it's like consistent building around our shared mission, which is the presentation of journalism and the ultimate sale of journalism. I think is a big part of it. I also think the subscriptions business has been very interesting in newsroom cultures, in that it's this great equalizer. Everyone can get behind this. Like there was a big debate when I was coming up about, why are we giving it away for free on the web, blah, blah, blah. Digital is this existential threat. And then also we started selling digital subscriptions, and these sort of old school folks could be like, well, I've been saying we should do that all along. And it's like, okay, cool, you were right, but now we're doing this together. It's like a very clear mission. It's kind of like triangle of like, oh, well, we get views that leads to advertiser dollars, that leads to all this other stuff that's very abstract for people. Subscriptions, I think, has really helped unite business sides and product sides, and like, hey, we need frictionless conversion flows. That's something I don't think newsrooms typically are like, I really want to own caring about that. I want to own doing journalism. I want to trust someone's there to help me sell it. And that's where product comes into play.
Yeah, fantastic answer. Does a chief product officer need to have profit and loss responsibility? Does a chief product officer need to have their own budget responsibility, their own tech teams, like a direct line of report? What about all these matrix structures with dotted lines?
Yeah, matrices. The matrix is difficult. Yeah. The matrix is difficult. I think difficult anywhere. I think that what we are more likely to see, I make sure all of my product managers have a good sense of how they're contributing to the top line revenue of the business. Like, they have to understand that. So direct P&L responsibility or not, that's something that I want them to care about. And I was really inspired by my time at HuffPost. During half that time, we were in the middle of the merger with Yahoo, and product managers there are what we on the East Coast refer to as GMs. I think those roles are actually the same. I think you will see more of a merging between the PMs and the GMs. And you know what? It wouldn't be a bad thing if someone with P&L responsibility had a deep, deep empathy and understanding for your customer. It would help them make better decisions on cost. So to me, I think, especially as to your question about cost cutting and looking at different ways to look at these roles, like hire a product person to run your business and you get a 2-for-1. You know, I mean, ultimately there is a massive amount of digital operations work that I don't think newsrooms have ever gotten right. How do we package and sell? What's pre to post sale look like? How can we do that more efficiently? How do we evaluate our metrics on a daily basis? How do we make sure the newsroom has the right tools to connecting? You know, the massive operations thing that product people are really well equipped to tackle. And so I think over time, you'll see people with product skill sets, chops, or, you know, whatever backgrounds move into these more business ownership roles.
Yeah. Good point. I'd love to start us off with some user questions. We already have some in the chat, and I already received some before via email. I'd start with the one from Rinda Agarwal, and I hope I pronounced it correctly. The industry is moving towards subscription, but don't you think subscription fatigue is setting in?
I do. I think, you know, if you think you've already got Netflix and Spotify, and on top of that, how many more news subscriptions are you going to pick up? I think that's right. I think that there is, and I was talking with Tony Hale, who many of you know, a while back, and he said, you know, I think the kind of spoils go to the New York Times in that instance, right? It's like if you could subscribe to anything, you know, why not subscribe to the New York Times? So I think that's real, and I think a real risk. What I would say is, number one, I think that, again, it points to differentiation. I think niche media is going to have a real opportunity to play. So maybe you need only 1 or 2 general interest subscriptions, but you really need something that's highly relevant to, say, your business. I think that's an opportunity for niche media. I also think, and one of the main reasons I joined HuffPost is I was so fascinated by the idea of free media in a free quality media in a landscape where everyone's going subscriptions. I think there is a place for free media and free quality media, and I think it'll be really interesting to see how that shakes out.
Yeah, definitely. The other question that we had in the chat from Elliot Karoom was about the Bloomberg product organization. Curious if it's bucketed between different verticals, subscriptions versus data products and core terminal product, and more generally, is there a downside to media products that customers are reluctant to pay for information they might gladly buy if it were a specialty data app? Not sure I understand the second part, maybe do you? But the first one is really how bucketed is the product operation at Bloomberg?
Sure, very bucketed. My charge is Bloomberg Media, where we touch general interest consumers across web, app, and OTT. There's a completely separate product organization for the terminal product that obviously focuses on a different target customer, and there's a completely separate product organization for BN, which is Bloomberg News, and some of the work they've done in news automation, which is very, very cool. I'm sure you guys at the J-School have leaned into it because it's super cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think to the second point, to the second question, I think it goes to my first answer, which is really that, yeah, I think there's an opportunity for niche media and niche products that all of us in all of our different newsrooms can develop for our core constituencies, right? So find out what people geek out about, and there you will find what people will pay for. Gross generalization, but you know, the closer you know to your customers, you start to think, man, this is something these people won't live without. You know, for Bloomberg, we're in the relative early days. We just passed our 2nd year anniversary of our subscription product. Relative early days of our subscription product, we are still focused very much on the bundle. But I think figuring out different tiers that we can build into our subscription packaging is a huge part of our future, trying to figure out the best way to maximize revenue and to figure out new products and services that really work for a certain segments of our audience.
Great. Kevin Painter asked, how can news teams design a good product? Well, that's a big question, but I'm sure you have a great answer for it. And 2 rounds of customer discovery and feedback post-COVID, tools, strategies.
Great question.
Just summarize your job in 2 sentences.
Well, look, post-COVID, I think, is the key to that question.
Yeah.
And actually today we're doing 2 days of in-depth interviews with politics hardcore readers in advance of the hardcore news junkies in advance of the election, and trying to figure out how to best serve their needs. And that's all over Zoom, and that has pros and cons. I think we have signed on with a tool called User Zoom that I'm super excited about, to help us better scale our user research efforts, which is currently done by one woman, Karen Johnson, complete rock star, and try to figure out ways that we can get essentially product feedback sessions happening more quickly and in the hands of designers, journalists, graphic artists, like people who really need feedback on whether the usability of something makes sense. I think we're excited about trying out User Zoom as the way to get there. So it's really all about, we've done kind of a full spectrum of user research, from like very scrappy, quick turn, give me feedback on this stuff, to like very deep, in-depth, diary studies and working directly with users. I think we are leaning more in a post-COVID landscape to like, what can we do in a scrappy basis just to make sure we're democratizing this? How can more people get access to those kinds of user feedback and insights?
I think that's a great point, because one fear that I sometimes encounter when I talk about product and UX with organizations that might just be in the early stages of adopting, the fear is, then we have to do this like giant, we have to have like research teams with hundreds of people, we have to do these giant and very expensive processes. So that's a fear that you can at least somehow take away from small organizations.
Yeah, and just try some stuff. Like, a big part of design thinking is like literally walking outside and asking someone to look at a paper prototype. And I think news organizations, we've overcomplicated the idea of user feedback. I remember at one stage in my career, 8 in-depth interviews meant the difference between us doing a project or us not doing a project. And like, wow, what not the way to do this. User research isn't a pass fail, right? It is one more set of inputs that can help you improve your product. And so our goal is, how do we scale that? And get it in the hands of more people.
Great point. More data is not always gonna be helpful. I myself sometimes tripped into this rabbit hole of, we can collect even more and more and more. At some point, it's just, the decision is not going to make itself at some point. Right. Yeah. One great question from Erin Slomek is, we're back to kind of subscriptions. Once you've earned the subscriber, what are the most valuable things a product manager can focus on to keep them and make them happy?
Well, first of all, hello, Erin. I know Erin. It depends on each organization. I think one of the things I've been very captivated by over the last several years is the concept of delivery. I think that's one thing analog media did particularly well, and in digital, our best bet is newsletters, and podcasts and stuff. There's got to be a better way. And so I think I focus on making sure that we're building features that continue to drive users back to the site, to remind them of the value of something they subscribe for. To give you an example, we've just launched a product called Story Threads that essentially is like a mix between an article and a Wikipedia page. It's sort of an encyclopedic listing of different stories on a topic, but also a kind of like what it all means resource about a given topic. And that comes with a follow function. So I want to follow this storyline, and our click-through rates have been 5 times our typical click-through rate on those newsletters, because people are like, I want to know about that. And that's an example of us like bringing the journalism to you, that I think is kind of novel, and I want to keep scratching that itch because I think there's a lot more there.
Yeah, great point. I'm jumping a bit in the questions just to cluster them around topics. And one question was from Corinne Podger, who asked about smaller regional outlets and outlets that might be in regional papers that are suffering most from ad dollar collapse and might not be up to speed yet with product thinking. How do they kind of get started? What are their strongest opportunities?
Great question. I think product thinking starts with human thinking, right? So I think the most important thing is for smaller outlets is to really dig in with whatever research you have, whether it's a simple survey you launched with your users or what have you, to figure out what really matters to your users and then deliver that. And if you keep providing value on the daily, you keep driving the habit that is the underpinning of most successful subscription businesses. So, to me, it's really about making sure you're laser focused on what your customers need and then going after that. We've all been in this industry a long time, right? Tons of trends have come and gone and things we've leaped at and what have you. This is not the time for that. This is the time for focusing on what really, really matters to your audience and delivering it consistently and delivering it well. And I think that is just good business, but I think it's actually the heart of, I think product thinking is at the heart of it because it's about getting back to what your users want. But like, honestly, this question just breaks my heart because first of all, she was up at 1:20 in the morning. Second of all, the regional players are going to have a very rough time. And I think, the best thing we can all do in this industry is just continue to provide that value.
Mm. And I mean, part of that's probably part of what can come out of these conversations that we are having. Is there a way, as large organizations, education institutions, is there a way to come up with support for these smaller and regional players, the ones who might not be able to take your, I'm sure, fantastic product class at Columbia University and might not be able to do the executive program we run at CUNY that has a lot of product in it, but organizations that need some help kind of getting started?
This is the thing I love about this industry. I have never been turned down when I've called a quote unquote competitor and been like, can you help me think through this? Do you want to swap some stories? I have found a great camaraderie in this industry when it comes to the business of news. So like, for sure, anyone can reach out to me. I also think there's a lot of tech that I don't spend a lot of time working through, but you can see with like Zeus and Arc at the Washington Post, there's a lot of tech kind of popping up and Penny Pass. There's a lot of tech popping up to try to help smaller players and regional players really take advantage of all the stuff that's out there that they wouldn't ordinarily be able to build themselves. And so I think there is a lot of, there are more resources out there than there've ever been.
Love to jump to a question about talent and skills, basically, because that's a question I get a lot from people who might be interested in entering the product space, both entry level, but then also, what do I need to know to become a chief product officer or director of product at some point? The question from Kevin here in this chat was how much hard coding skills, how much tech skills do you need? You talked a little bit about the business skills and the business like understanding and savviness that you need. What do you think makes a good product manager? And are those the same qualities that you need to be a great chief product officer?
Great question. And it certainly depends on your organization. Back when I was applying for colleges, there were like all these articles being written, and it was like, colleges no longer want well-rounded students. They want well-rounded classes. So they don't want to hear that you can play the trombone and are starting forward in your basketball team. They want the best basketball player and the best trombone player. This was unwelcome news to me, who's always been a jack of all trades, master of none. I think the same is true when it comes to product managers. I have worked with exceptional data product managers. I have worked with product managers with incredible tech skills, people who are former engineers that come over. I have worked with product managers who come from a design background, product managers who come from a journalism background. I've also worked with product managers who sort of don't really know how they fell into this, but they're really good listeners. So I think there isn't a one-way path. What I often say to, what I said to students in this class that I taught this semester was, have you managed a to-do list? You can do this, right? Are you organized and structured in your thinking? You can do this. And then the rest of it you learn. And so depending on your background, there are things you can do to bolster that and help you get over that imposter syndrome and learn the language. Like, for example, taking a PMP course, or learning about becoming Agile certified, learning about the process of Scrum and working with engineers. But the way I got into it was by being a reporter. In every meeting, I realized, like, I didn't understand that. And so I'd ask a bunch of questions, and I am eternally grateful to a guy named Ravi Bhaskar, who was like my first engineering partner, who patiently put up with all of my questions, which basically helped me understand like how the front end talks to the back end, which is like a skill I use to this day. So I never learned engineering, but I learned how to listen. And again, I like it to reporting just because it's what I know, and I think it's something this audience is familiar with. But it really is about finding different sources, asking a lot of questions, and trying to understand, and then figuring out the best way forward.
Sorry. I love Kate Hawkins' question that she just posted on metrics. And I think that there were some questions, and I received some in advance about metrics. So let's maybe dig into that for a few minutes. Revenue and retention are very clear success metrics. Can you share anything about content success metrics you use aside from those two?
Sure. Well, I'm going to answer a question you didn't ask first, but actually the metric we care the most about in our subscription business is active subscribers. And what I love about that particular metric is that it is inclusive of both acquisition and retention. So the number of subscribers you have that are active on each given day. What I love about that metric is I think it's really galvanized the team that there are indeed two levers you can pull in a subscription business, and making sure you're cognizant of both of them. Because sure, we could drop the price and way up on acquisition, but it wouldn't really help us with our retention metric. So I think that, I mean, I'm someone who spends way too much time nerding out on metrics, but I think that especially as you go into subscription businesses, but across this business, having real precision and caring about what metrics you choose to measure yourself with just save a lot of pain down the line. Content. Content is an interesting one. I would say that one of the metrics our product team was very focused on this year was about returning unique visitors. So are we getting people to come back to the site? And that was a metric of, or that metric was an attempt to get at, are we consistently providing value that would drive you to come back to the site? So that was something we cared about. On more of a unique piece of content level, I have not been a huge fan of dwell time, which I know is very popular in the industry, because I think there's value to that sort of Google line about getting your customers what they want as fastly as, as quickly as possible. It shouldn't be discounted. I think there's a real value in that. I have cared a lot about completion rate. We've done a lot of experiments with kind of an Instagram stories format, tap storytelling. And we've found incredible success, like 96% completion rates through those stories. And what that says to me are people know how to use this format, and they're hungry for something that, many of you have heard me say this, but like we started with a long column of text at Gutenberg, and we have not changed that in hundreds of years. Text is ripe for some innovation, and I think the stories format is showing us one way to do that. And so completion rate is kind of an interesting metric, but that's one of the ones I care about.
Fantastic. And I'd like to add a follow-up question to that I received in advance from someone leading product in a news organization in Germany. And he wrote me that he said, well, we have subscription and smart metrics in place, but his problem is that no one in the newsroom is actually following them. While officially their metrics are focused on retention and engagement, people in the newsroom still mostly focus on clicks. How do I change that?
I mean, we had a pretty big investment this year in getting more reporting into the hands of the many, if you will. Changing the reports that went out to news teams so that they understood how their work was laddering up to the subscription business. Again, like I said before, I think subscriptions is one of these things that like news people really get behind. And so I think there was some enthusiasm for that, but it's really about awareness. You know, the glow at the Washington Post, and I was there for the first 3 years of the Bezos era, which was amazing. Completely no doubt about it. But, you know, if you read the trades, you'd be forgiven to thinking that Bezos showed up with his golden, you know, touch and everything was amazing. But like the transformation of the Washington Post actually started many years before that. And one of those early forces was Raju Narasetti, who was our managing editor at the time, hanging what appeared to be a flat screen TV on something that looked like a music stand in his office that just had the numbers on how we were doing, and then introduced a culture of metrics into that newsroom that hadn't really had it before. And so I think that democratize those numbers, get them in the hands of the many, even when they're messy. You know, like our numbers have been at record highs, they're starting to go down. This is leading to panic on these new sales reps, so I put on these reports. That's okay, because I'd rather have them understand the truth of what digital traffic looks like, which is up and down.
Definitely. And that kind of brings me, so we're nearly at the end, but I'd love you to answer that question that Nick Patry posted in the chat. Hi, Nick. He basically asked about the culture. He basically asked a culture question that I think summarizes a lot of what we talked about. Legacy news organizations still have very much command and control structures in place on a day-to-day basis, but a good approach to product often breaks this very controlled approach and kind of breaks these structures, which means challenging senior staff, challenging existing assumptions. So basically, I'd say driving culture change to a certain extent. What are your thoughts on that? How do you do that successfully?
Well, I think you should answer this one. This is one of your specialties. Here are my thoughts. There's a quote often attributed to Jeff Bezos, which I'm not 100% sure he actually said, which is, to be an innovator is to be misunderstood for long periods of time. Period, the end. It never gets easy. I think it is the most difficult human thing to be misunderstood. And when you are introducing change and new ways of thinking and new job titles that didn't exist, and you don't speak like a salesman like everyone else, it is difficult. And you go home at the end of the day and you feel kind of misunderstood and unhappy about that. You know, that said, you know, when you see change happen, it makes it all worth it. So I think I pick my battles for sure. But I think I try to resort to a world of testing. You know what? We don't have to decide in boardrooms anymore. You know, that's the magic of right now. You know, our industry used to work that way. It was, you know, sort of edit versus business and decisions and blah, blah. We can try it. We can A/B test it. And, you know, that's something everyone can get behind, sometimes begrudgingly, but for the most part. So for me, navigating that tension has often been like, I see people disagreeing. Is there a way we can test this? And that's like one strategy I've used to kind of get out of that mess. You know, but the big picture I have, which is possibly not optimistic, but I guess I see a lot of power in it, is it kind of sucks. But you know what? Like, that's change agent work. And you know, this guy who I mentioned before, who came to work for me on the subscription side, he's a true acquisition product manager, like big tech, like has done acquisition for companies that are not at all media companies. And he showed up and he brought a true product approach to this business. And it, first of all, 5x star results. Second of all, got people speaking the language. And like that, to me, like I will carry that victory for me for years, at how a true product approach, when done with humility and with empathy for the culture you're in, can really make a difference.
Fantastic. No, fantastic last words, and nothing to add to that in terms of the difficulty, but also the beauty of driving culture change in media organizations.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia, for your time. Thank you, everyone, for the very engaged discussion and the great and amazing questions. We'll continue this conversation with other events in this series. Thanks, Julia, for being here.
No worries. Thank you guys for having me.
Bye.
Take care.